Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's video, we will discuss 5 important topics as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your larger understanding of the current affairs. The topics are as follows. In the first article, we will read about heat action plans required to address the issue of global warming. In the second article, we will read about various benefits offered by agroforestry and challenges in its adoption. In the third article, we will read about the steps taken by the government for the privatization of space sector. In the fourth article, we will learn about the grave issue of mob lynching, and then in the fifth article, we will read about what exactly is UNCTAD. Towards the end, there will be news snippets especially curated to help you excel in the upcoming prelims examination. So stay tuned. As Indian Meteorological Department has alerted for the impact of heat waves across the country, there arises an emerging need for heat action plans to deal with the climate change-induced global warming which is taking place. Thus, the heat action plans forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the themes of climate change and disaster management. Well, comes the month of summer and we are used to seeing various kind of heat alerts being released by Indian Meteorological Department or IMD, which has significantly increased in the wake of global warming induced climate change. For example, this year such heat alerts started from the month of February itself, and they are further going to rise because as per a UNFCCC report, the years from 2023 to 2027 will be the warmest years on the record, which can be reflected from the reports coming from across the country where several places has registered increase of temperature up to 3 to 5 degrees Celsius above than the normal temperature of the region, thus highlighting the grave issue of heat waves. So let's first try to understand what do we exactly mean by heat waves. As per the definition given by Indian Meteorological Department, the classification of heat waves depends upon the physiography of the region. For example, if there is a station which experiences the rise of temperature up to 40 degrees Celsius in the plain region, then that region is supposed to be facing heat waves. Similarly, if the maximum temperature recorded at a station is above 37 degrees Celsius for a coastal area and 30 degrees Celsius for a hills area, then that region is considered to be facing heat wave. Then the heat wave can also be declared in a condition where the temperature is more than 45 degrees Celsius at any location and a severe heat wave if the temperature is more than 47 degrees Celsius. However, such classification will be based upon two conditions. The first is that any two stations in a meteorological subdivision faces such extreme temperature, or any one such station faces such extreme temperature of more than 45 to 47 degrees Celsius for 2 consecutive days. Then we measure the intensity of the heat waves by defining it as the departure from the normal temperature. So let's say you live in a particular region where the average temperature is around 30 degrees Celsius. However, in this particular year, the temperature has risen up to 34.5 to 36.4 degrees Celsius, which means that the place in which you are living, it is facing a normal heat wave. And if the temperature goes above 34.6 degrees Celsius, then you are facing severe heat wave in your region. And such persistent heat wave can have significant impact on humans' health as well as on several other conditions. For example, if there exists a wet bulb temperature, which is characterized by the persisting high temperature as well as high humidity, So in normal conditions, when our body starts experiencing external heat, it starts releasing the heat from the body through the method of sweating. But what if there already exists high amount of moisture in your surrounding? In that particular case, your body will become unable to sweat and thus unable to lose the internal body heat by sweating and cool the body itself. Thus, it can lead to heat strokes or a condition of hyperthermia, which can lead to either hospitalization or even fatality up to death. And this condition can be especially faced among the poorer sections of the society which does not have the comfort of air conditioners at their home. Then, because of this, we can see that there has been rampant increase in the cases of death due to heat waves, even though a lot of underreporting is being done by the government authorities in the recent years. Then, as this global warming will take place, the condition of such heat waves will further exacerbate. Thus, the water bodies such as ponds, lakes and even the underground water will start drying up, thus further exacerbating the issue of water scarcity in our country. As we can see from the map here, there are several regions such as Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan where the groundwater has declined up to 20 meter or even more. At the same time, in our country, we depend and use on underground water for large scale of irrigation. And at the same time, 90% of rice and wheat which is grown in our country, it is solely done from the use of groundwater. Then, as per the Ministry of Power's estimation, because of this heat wave, there will be rampant increase in the demand of energy for cooling purposes, such as use of refrigeration, AC, etc. And because of that, there can take place a peak power demand up to 260 gigawatt in the upcoming months from April to June, which will even surpass the peak demand which was of 243 gigawatt recorded in last year's September. And such peak power demand can obviously lead to the energy shortages. Also, keep this in mind that the majority of the production or the power generation in our country comes from the thermal sector. Thus, as the energy demand will increase, there will be further utilization of fossil fuel based power generation, thus releasing more and more greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, which will ultimately further increase the global warming or the temperature, thus increasing the cases of heat waves as well. Thus, to deal with such issues, the governments at various levels such as national, district and state have come up with a heat action plan. Heat action plan is basically a comprehensive early warning system and a kind of a preparedness plan to deal with extreme heat conditions. Currently, the National Disaster Management Authority along with the Indian Meteorological Department is formulating such heat action plans in 23 states of the country, where such heat action plans provides for short-term and long-term measures. Short-terms such as forecasting an early warning system to the larger public as well as government authorities about the impending heat wave. Then doing social engineering by educating the people about the risk associated with such heat waves and the precautionary measures which shall be taken. Then to direct the district authorities to establish health and cooling centers. For example, providing for a public water drinking facility, like we have seen those payjals where we have access freely and we can drink water to keep ourselves hydrated during the summer months. Then to directive to the local health authorities to boost the health infrastructure, to make sure that there are adequate number of suggestive measures as well as healthcare professionals to deal with the large influx of patients who are suffering from such heat stroke. Also, it provides for some long-term measures, such as providing for urban planning strategy, where we can go for tree plantation drives, or we can adopt for climate resilient building materials, or we can adopt for cool roofing technology, thus leading to low solar radiation absorption. Thus it will help us in cooling the houses and we will not need that much of energy or requirement of ACs as such. Then to create coordination among various stakeholders such as government, health authorities, emergency service providers, or civil society organizations which are working for the climate change initiatives. Thus, a heat action plan ultimately provides for the heat profile of the region, creates a database about the number of past heat wave events, then creates an yearly trend in the summer maximum temperature, and then by this data based monitoring it aims to create a vulnerability assessment, provide for recommendations for mitigation of such heat wave, and then sets down the roles and responsibilities of various departments. But as per the report in the newspaper, there persist several issues associated with such a heat action plan. The first of them is the absence of local context, because most of these heat action plans, they just adopt the national threshold for heat wave, and thus they do not cater to the local needs of the people. To understand this, let's take an example. Let's say that you are living in a particular area where the average temperature is around 30 degrees Celsius. Now that temperature has risen up to 35 degrees Celsius, and thus your body is not adaptable to such extreme change in the temperature and you are facing heat wave, and thus you require immediate relief situations. However, the region in which you are living in falls in the plain category as per IMD. And thus, according to IMD, the heat wave has yet not taken place in the region, because it will only consider a heat wave to happen if it will go above 40 degrees Celsius. Thus, such absence of local context leaves large areas to adopt any such local and sustainable strategies. For example, only 10 out of the 37 heat action plans for 28 states and 9 union territories have locally specified temperature thresholds. Then, even if such heat action plans exist and there is some local level of efforts being done to measure the average temperature or rise in the temperature, or to create a plan for vulnerability assessment, even then such methods are mired by inconsistency. Then there is issue related to the definition of the vulnerable population. For example, as per IMD, such vulnerable population consists of people who have low economic situation, or the people who are elderly, or children, etc. But by limiting such definition, we leave a large section of the people who faces the brunt of such scorching heat. For example, 90% of India's economy falls in the informal sector, where people such as street vendor, chai wala, or someone who is doing this delivery to your home, all these are facing the brunt of scorching heat, especially caused by the social inequalities which persist. And there are not any specific provisions to help them under these heat action plans. Then there is underfunding of HAPs, because the district authorities are supposed to implement such heat action plan or to create some public water drinking facility by their own dedicated funds, thus ultimately leading to the shortage of funds for heat action plans. For example, only 3 out of the 37 HAPs has identified any kind of funding sources. Then there is exists a weak legal foundation. Because if you have observed, we have talked about heat action plans, but I have not yet mentioned any statutory act which are backing such action plans, thus not providing any incentives for bureaucracy to prioritize such heat action plans in their district. Over and above this, keep this in mind that there exists high climate vulnerability when it comes to our country. As per the German Watch report, India is the 7th most climate vulnerable country in the world, which is also reflected from the diagram here, where the number of heat waves has significantly increased in the recent years. Especially in 2022, where the heat wave days were more than the last 3 years combined. And this issue is obviously going to increase further. Thus, there are several measures which the report suggests which shall be adopted, such as to inculcate local factors. For example, if there is a particular area which is experiencing urban heat island effect, or the reason what is its proximity to green and blue spaces such as parks, lakes, ponds, etc., or what is specifically the humidity of that region. All these local factors shall be incorporated in these heat action plans. Then there shall be development of a heat index as well as a nationwide climate risk assessment to identify the vulnerability of the people to these heat waves, as well as to identify the hot spots which are facing the extreme rise in the temperature. Then we shall follow the constitutional directive under the Article 47 of the Constitution, which directs the state to ensure public health. And for that purpose, we need to expand the definition of vulnerable population under such heat action plans. Then towards the end, there we shall try to create dedicated budgets, which can be done by bringing all the stakeholders such as government, civil society organizations, private companies under their corporate social responsibility, as well as individuals to further create a financing mechanism for such heat action plans. Towards the end, we shall strive to adopt nature-based solutions such as these green buildings of Singapore, as well as to adopt for Miyawaki method for urban afforestation. With all these noble suggestions, we move forward to the next news of the day. The article in the newspaper highlights the benefits of the adoption of agroforestry as well as challenges that persist in its adoption, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of agriculture and types of cropping. So let's first try to understand what exactly is agroforestry. Well, agriculture in India has always been associated with diverse use of land and the plantation by the farmers, such as integration of trees, crops, as well as livestock to create a healthy ecosystem. This is exactly what we mean by agroforestry, where instead of just growing trees or just growing crops, we start growing them together to reap its environmental benefits. As can be seen from the image here of an agroforestry in the Coimbatore. Then, in the years of 1970s and 80s, such traditional system of agroforestry was replaced by monoculture cropping practices under Green Revolution, where we started growing staple crops such as rice, wheat, pulses, etc. on large plantation scale to ensure food security in our country. However, such practice of monoculture cropping or growing one crop at a large scale level actually led to several adverse impacts on our environment as well as agriculture. The first of them being the soil degradation and the fertility loss. Because as we are growing only one particular crop, it actually cannot prevent the soil erosion which take place, and ultimately causing the soil degradation. as well as repeated growing of one crop in a particular area actually deprives the soil from any kind of nutrient recycling, and thus soil over the years start losing its fertility, thus leading to the increasing use of fertilizers, where farmers seek to improve the fertility of the soil through artificial methods by using fertilizers such as urea, diammonium phosphate, muriate phosphate, etc. As we can see that over the years, the use of such fertilizers has rampantly increased. Also, as we were talking about the fertility, we can also see that the crop yield has significantly declined over the years as well. Then, such monocropping leads to the large depletion of water resources because of the association of such monocropping with the commercial crops, where we start growing water intensive crops such as rice, sugarcane, cotton, etc. And as we can see from the table, India is a major producer of water intensive crops with having high shares of the global production, thus ultimately depleting our water resources. Then obviously there is increasing use of pesticides because monocropping by its nature itself promotes the large scale invasion of pests, as they can move from one plant to another with ease, leading to a wide spread of disease. Thus, we need to use a large number of pesticides which ultimately release various kinds of greenhouse gases such as methane. And obviously all these factors impact the pollinators such as bees and butterfly who refrain from such monocropping area because of it being a homogeneous food territory. Then all these factors accumulate and lead to the biodiversity loss, where because of the loss of insects and important bacteria such as rhizobium, over a period of time we observe that there take place a biodiversity loss in that region. And all these factors has a cumulative impact of increasing economic vulnerability of the farmers. Because you have grown only one particular crop, if that crop gets devastated because of some spread of disease or because of any other climatic factor, it can ultimately causes huge economic distress among the farmers. Thus, there is agroforestry as a viable alternative to its widespread monocropping practices in our country because it has several benefits to offer. First of them being that it can enhance the profit of the farmers, because the trees now which we are growing along with the crops, it can provide to meet our fuel demand, provide for timber, plywood as well as raw material for the pulp industry, thus significantly augmenting the income of the farmer. For example, trees still provide for 60 to 70% of the need of plywood and act as a 70% raw material for the pulp industry. Thus, with these after impacts, agroforestry can actually help us in achieving the recommendation of the Dalwai Committee, which strive to double the farmer's income. At the same time, agroforestry can lead to carbon sequestration as well, thus providing for cleaner air as well as help us to achieve our global climate goals, such as our Panch Amrit target to create 2.5 to 3 billion additional carbon sink of CO2 by the year of 2030, as well as helping us in becoming a carbon neutral country by the year of 2070. Then, such agroforestry is actually ecologically friendly because of the nitrogen fixation which takes place by the trees such as pungam, murungai, soyabean, clover, etc. It can significantly reduce the nitrogen demand as per the report by Indian Council of Agriculture Research by 50 kg to 100 kg per hectare per year. and thus we do not need to rely on the import of such fertilizers as well, and it will also reduce the global warming impact. Then such agroforestry will help us in offering various kind of ecosystem services, such as controlling the soil erosion, doing water retention, as well as nutrient recycling. And because of such benefits offered by agroforestry, the government of India has taken several steps in this regard. Thus, in year of 2014, India became the first country in the world to adopt a national level agroforestry policy, under which in 2016 there was launched a 4,000 to 5,000 crore fund to transform the agroforestry sector with a tagline of "Har Med Per Ped." Also, the government has launched Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, in which agroforestry is a major component, where we are trying to promote several types of intercropping methods, agroforestry being one of them. Keep this in mind that agroforestry is also a major component of LIFE mission, which was launched in the COP28. Then recently, with the enactment of Forest Conservation Act of 2023, the government has provided for farmers that now they can grow forest in their farmland as well, and then they can sell these farmlands to corporates, thus enhancing their income. Then the government of India and the Ministry of Environment and Forest has also joined Tree Outside Forest India initiative, where the USAID or United States Agency for International Development is planning to enhance the tree cover in 7 Indian states. Keep this in mind here that this is a very major initiative from the perspective of prelims as well. However, as highlighted by the report, there persist several issues in the adoption of agroforestry, especially by the small and marginal farmers. The first is that obviously the issue of water availability. Because now to grow the trees, the farmers will require large amount of water. So either they can grow for the groundwater extraction on the larger scale, further increasing the energy demand, or also there is another issue where these trees, they start competing with the plants for the water resources, specifically in the water sensitive regions such as hard aquifer region or the drought prone regions of the central India. Thus, the farmers will require much and more water, which will ultimately become unaffordable for such small and marginal farmers. And there does not lies any kind of financing mechanism by the government to support these farmers. Keep this in mind that as per the Swaminathan Commission report, in India more than 86% of the farmers have less than 2 hectares of land. And obviously, the such large section of farmers cannot afford to adopt agroforestry. The second reason is obviously difficulty in finding the right tree species to grow. Because more of the times these farmers, they actually put impetus on non-native trees such as this Lantana camara, which ultimately leads to the leaching and volatilization and suppressing the regeneration process of the native plant species, thus creating the formation of a dense monospecies in that particular region. And why farmers adopt such non-native species? First is to grow because these trees, they grow fast, and the second is to rebel the herbivores. For example, trees such as Casuarina, Eucalyptus, Lantana camara, etc. The next reason is the lack of systematic support for financing. For example, even there was a recent Indian Forest and Wood Certification Scheme which was launched by the government, and it contains such an exhausting eligibility criteria that it actually ultimately excludes a large section of farmers. Then there is a lack of know-how among the farmers. where the farmers are unaware or not educated enough to know which plant species to grow, which are the commercial trees which can help them. There is no such ground level data dissemination which is taking place among them to educate them. Thus, the report suggests for some steps which shall be taken, such as a water accounting tool being Jaltol, which provides information about the species which are not competing and can be grown along with the crops. For example, as per Jaltol, there is mango plantation which if grown in Karnataka region in the Kharif season, it does not compete with the crops which are growing for the extraction of water. Then we can create an information sharing portal where such information related to trees species and all can be disseminated at the larger level by using Krishi Vigyan Kendras. And also such tool can be adopted for diversity of restoration tool where we can also promote climate resilient trees such as neem, etc. And to create a funding mechanism, we can provide for payment for ecosystem services, where buyers such as philanthropists, government, companies, they can pay to the farmers or landowners for the ecosystem services which are being generated through their farm or through trees, such as watershed conservation, biodiversity conservation, or the reduction in the carbon emission as such provision which has been provided under the Forest Conservation Act 2023. Also, there are certain other steps which we can take by doing market linkages or providing security of land tenure to these small farmers to further make them implement such agroforestry in the region to enhance their income and create economic sustainability among the farmers. With these suggestions, we move forward to the next news of the day. The Ministry of Finance has amended the rules under the Foreign Exchange Management Act or FEMA to allow for up to 100% foreign direct investment in the space sector, leading to the privatization of space, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of space technology. So let's first try to understand why there is need for privatization of space. Well, as per a report by Deep Space Analytics, India is currently the 6th largest player in the space sector with around 3.6% space companies of the world, and it has potential to grow up to a 50 billion industry by the year of 2050 itself. Then we need to expand our satellite based services, because after the digital revolution which has taken place and with the rising mobile internet penetration, use of OTT platforms, use of social media, the increasing use of internet has taken place. And to provide these internet services, we still rely 50% on foreign satellites. Thus, we need to expand our satellite based services. As well as if we form a global comparison, then post 1990, the total number of satellites which has been launched, 90% of that has come from the private sector. However, in India, only 2% of the satellites has been launched by the private sector. Thus, if such privatization will take place, it will actually allow the ISRO to move towards research and development based projects as it is being done by NASA. Thus, it will be able to focus more upon projects such as Gaganyaan, which aims to take Indians to the space, or Aditya L1 mission, which aims to study the coronosphere of the sun. Then there is need to secure outer space capabilities and resources. which can help us in dissemination of such knowledge at such lower levels through academia, students, startups, etc., which will ultimately lead to the tech upgradation of the economy, thus providing for large scale employment as well. As per the estimation by the Department of Space, such tech upgradation can actually lead to the creation of more than 1 lakh skilled jobs. Then it will ultimately reduce the burden on the government, which largely funds the missions by ISRO, whose annual budget is around 14 to 15,000 crore, and ultimately leading to the reducing of fiscal deficit of the government as well. Thus, if we form a global comparison, then the global space economy is around 447 billion, which might have reached to the 500 billion by the year of 2025. And the total number of operating satellites around US accounts for the highest proportion of that, while India has a meager share of 2%. Then if we talk about the space tech companies across the world, India is currently at 6th place with 412 companies. However, if we look at USA and China, they are far ahead of us. Thus, these issues persist because of several challenges which are faced by the private sector when it comes to their domination in the space. And first of them is the limited research and development investment by the private sector. If we look at the budget dedicated to space by other countries such as US and China, it is far and far ahead as much allotted by India. And this is also reflected with the private sector, as their total investment forms only 0.5% of the global investment by other private companies. Then such private sector actually complains of facing an access barrier because, according to their complaint, various intellectual property rights related to the space sector is actually held by ISRO, thus making the space sector commercially unviable for them. Also, if they are indulging into a project, any such space project, if we are talking about Mars space mission or Moon space mission, all of them have long gestation period or long formulation period and implementation, and thus it requires a need of large level seed funding, where you fund into a several project without any prospect of profitable returns. But such funding is very less when it comes to the private sector and its integration into the space because of the high cost to output ratio. For example, missions such as planetary missions or innovation missions or debris cleaning missions, all of these projects which has high cost to output ratio have very few takers. Then even if such funding is provided, these private sector is mired with limited tech capabilities. For example, private companies such as Skyroot or Agnikul Cosmos, all of such private companies in India has been limited to launching micro level satellites. And if we compare to foreign players such as SpaceX by Elon Musk, then we are far and far behind. Also, earlier, there existed an issue of duplication of agencies such as ISRO, NSIL, and there were various regulatory barriers as well, to curb which the government has taken several steps, first of them being creating of InSpace, which act as a single window agency to promote private players in the space sector. For example, very recently, InSpace has signed 45 Memorandum of Understandings with non-government entities. Then, to provide them with various kind of funding, the government has launched an innovation fund as well as providing for seed funding scheme as well as price support policy to these private sector, thus acting as a seed funding for these private sector. Now, with very recent report, the Ministry of Finance has allowed for 100% of foreign direct investment in the space sector. Keep this in mind that this 100% FDI can be availed in the form where 74% of FDI can be done through automatic route, and above 74% the private company will require the permission of the government. Now such 100% FDI is available in manufacturing and operation of satellites. And then let's say if a private company wants to create a launch vehicle or to create a spaceport for launching and receiving of the satellites, then at the first stage only 49% FDI will be allowed through automatic route, and over and above that you will require the government's permission. Then there has been several tweaking of the definition of the components has been done. For example, the satellite manufacturing and operation will now include end-to-end manufacturing, supply of satellite payloads, control of in-orbit operations. Then the satellite data products will include a larger definition of reception, generation and dissemination of Earth observation satellite, remote sensing satellite as well as application interfaces. Then the ground segment where 100% FDI is allowed, it includes spaceports where FDI will be 49% through automatic routes, then the satellite control center as well as tracking and command station. So all of these components can now be invested through the medium of foreign direct investment. And this has been done just prior to the visit of Elon Musk in our country. Now, all these comprehensive measures will ensure that there will be large-scale private participation in the space sector. And it will ultimately fulfill the aim of our Honorable Prime Minister, which is reflected from his epithet, that is, space is the space to be in. With this, we move forward to the next news of the day. The recent Hapur judgment highlights the grave issue of increasing mob lynching in the country, which tarnishes India's secular fabric. And this issue of mob lynching forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the theme of social issues. Well, as the story goes, back in 2018 in Agra, there was a man who was traveling with a small child. And the crowd and traffic around suspected that man to be responsible for the human trafficking of that small child. Thus, they attacked on this suspected person, which ultimately caused the death of that person. So, the justice was delivered immediately, served on the platter. However, as the police investigation later revealed, that man was actually a close relative of that small child who was unable to convey this to the public, which has gathered to release their anguish on an innocent person. Such targeted attack of violence committed by the large gathering of crowd is actually termed as mob lynching, where the people usually takes the law in their hand and consider themselves to be the deliverer of the justice. Now, such issues of mob lynching has been increasing rampantly in our country, as can be seen from the graph here, where the cases registered for promoting enmity on the basis of religion, race and place of birth has drastically increased. So what are the causes of such grave issue of mob lynching taking place in country like India? The first is obviously the increasing bystander apathy, or the loss of moral values, where people have become less tolerant toward the various kinds of diversities they are exposed to in a diverse country like India. The second is the inherited bias, where a large section of people have, where they contain prejudices on the basis of caste, religion, various kind of dogmas which persist, thus ultimately creating the feeling of us versus other. Also, there lies several socio-economic factors as highlighted by various sociologists. where they say that such people who commit such act of violence often comes from the section of low education or have poor economic background. And such people are also very much prone to the hate mongering politics of the politicians, where they try to create enmity between various groups, ultimately for their own personal profit. Then, obviously, to over and above this and augment such serious issue, there exists inefficiency of public administration. As it can be seen from the Qureshi case, which was highlighted in the article, the police actually deleted the evidence of confession by the culprit and presented in the court that no such mob lynching has taken place. Why such inefficiency lies there on behalf of public administration? First, there can be inherited biases because such police is also coming from a particular caste or a particular community. Then obviously there lies a lot of political pressure as well, as it was seen from the case of ethnic violences when it was taking place between the Kuki and Zemo community. Then over and above this, there lies lack of speedy justice, where there grows a lot of mistrust between the public and the judiciary, and the public thinks that the justice is not being served or it will not be served by the judiciary, and thus they start taking laws in their hands. So what are the steps which has been taken to control the mob lynching in our country? Well, there are several guidelines which has been established by the Supreme Court of the country, especially under the T. Poonewala judgment of 2017, where the Supreme Court directed that there will be a designated officer of SP rank or Superintendent of Police rank as a nodal officer in the district to prevent any kind of mob violence. Then it also directed the center and state governments to broadcast radio and TV and online messages to warn that lynching and such mob violence will require serious consequences. Then the court stated that there shall be suo motu FIR registration by the local police authorities in the case of such mob lynching or spreading of social enmity. Also, the police and district administrations, if they fail to comply with the Supreme Court direction, then it will be deemed as a deliberate negligence. Finally, the Supreme Court also provided to draw up a compensation scheme for the victim of such mob lynching, and such relief shall be provided within the next 30 days. Thus, on the lines of the direction provided by the Supreme Court, several states have launched their own anti-mob lynching programs. However, there does not still exist a central level anti-mob lynching regulations in our country. Thus, to ensure that such grave issue does not tarnish the social secular fabric of our country and maligns our image of our nation, where we take pride in the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam or one earth, one family, we need to ensure that such cases of mob lynching has to be strictly controlled. With this, we move forward to the next news of the day. As per UNCTAD report, the Indian economy is projected to grow by 6.5% in 2024, thus continuing to be the fastest growing major economy in the world. This UNCTAD as a UN organization forms an important component for our upcoming prelims examination under the section of economy. So let's try to inquire about the UNCTAD, why it was formed and what are the major provisions of it. Well, UNCTAD was established in the year of 1964 by the United Nations General Assembly, and it acts as an intergovernmental organization within the UN Secretariat to promote the interest of developing countries in the world trade. Keep this in mind that the major principle behind the formation of UNCTAD was because the developing country was of the view that the Bretton Woods institutions such as World Bank, IMF or GATT, which later transformed into World Trade Organizations, they have inherent biases toward the developed countries. Thus, UNCTAD was established to promote the interest of developing countries, where it formulates policies such as trade, aid, transport, finance, as well as technology. Its secretariat is currently in Geneva, Switzerland, and it has 195 major countries. One of the principal achievements of UNCTAD is the generalized system of preferences, which aims to promote the export of manufacturing goods by the developing nations. Then there are several important reports which are released by the UNCTAD which we need to keep in our mind. The first is the Trade and Development Report. The second is the World Investment Report. Then UNCTAD also releases a report specifically for the least developed countries. And it has also started releasing the Technology and Innovation Report, as you guys can see here. So keep UNCTAD very dear to you for the upcoming prelims, and we move to the next segment of our news today. In this particular segment, we are going to cover the news which are specifically important for your upcoming prelims examination. The first of which is the Green Credit Program, which has been repeatedly in the news. What do we mean by Green Credit? Green Credit is basically a unit of incentive which is provided for the positive impact on environment, such as plantation of trees, as under the Miyawaki method as we were talking about, or the restoration of wetlands, for example, for which the government has launched MISTI scheme. And this program forms the part of the LIFE mission or Lifestyle for Environment mission, which was launched in COP28, which took place in Dubai, UAE. Now, this program has been notified under the provisions of Environment Protection Act of 1986. And keep this in mind that it is independent, or this green credit is different from the carbon credit which is provided under the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, which is governed by the Energy Conservation Act of 2001. Now, any individual, public or private sector unit can provide for the funding of such afforestation taking place, and actual afforestation will be done by the state forest departments, where growing of one tree will be equal to one green credit. Now, in the next news, we talk about the leaf litter frog, which is an endemic species to the Brazilian Atlantic rainforest. Why leaf litter frog is in the news? Because it creates ultrasonic sound, a sound which cannot be heard by the humans. So as a humans, our hearing range is from 20 to 20,000 hertz. But this leaf litter frog, it emits more than that, that is 20 kilohertz to 44 kilohertz of sound, termed as ultrasonic sound, which is not audible to humans, and it emits this sound to scare off the predators such as bat, cat, etc. Now, in the next news, we talk about a critically endangered species very oftenly seen in the news, that is Great Indian Bustard, which is a flagship species of the grassland, and it is a state bird of Rajasthan. It has been repeatedly in the news because of the rampant decline in the population, especially taking place because of their collision with the electric wires. Keep this in mind that this Great Indian Bustard, the largest population of them is in the area of Rajasthan, specifically in Desert National Park, which has been asked by the prelims earlier years. Then only 5 breeding sites has been left now, and their population has dwindled to 150 to 200, ultimately making them critically endangered under the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. Thus, there has been several steps which has been taken to increase their population, one of them being National Conservation GIB breeding program, which involves the governments of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, and is being supervised by the Wildlife Institute of India. The Great Indian Bustard is also protected under the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Keep these important facts very dear to you for the prelims, and we move to the last news of the day, which talks about the heavy rainfall in Dubai, an unprecedented event, where the highest rainfall has been observed in Dubai since 1949, when such data measurement started taking place. Keep this in mind that United Arab Emirates, of which Dubai is the capital, was established in the year of 1971, and it is basically an arid Arabian Peninsula country, where we normally associate Dubai with large deserts, camel rides. So why such unprecedented scenes are occurring? Well, as per the news report, there are several causes. Most important of which is the storm system which was actually passing through the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf of Oman. Also, people are saying that because the recent cloud seeding activity which was done in Dubai, that has also further enhanced this storm system. Also, when the climate change takes place and because of the global warming, if there is rise in the temperature by 1 degree Celsius, it actually leads to 7% increase in the evaporation activity. And because of global warming, the temperature in Dubai has also increased. So that can also be a cause. Also, some climatologists has also suggested for El Nino as a factor, where it ultimately alters the reversal of the seasonal winds, and it ultimately caused to the stagnation of large scale of clouds in the Dubai region. So there are several factors which are also important from the perspective of geophysical phenomena. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.